This hearing will come to order. Without objection, the chairman is authorized to declare recess at any time. Before I deliver my opening remarks, I wanted to note that today the committee is meeting virtually. I want to announce a couple of reminders to the members about the conduct of this hearing. First, members should keep their video feed on as long as they are present in the hearing. Members are responsible for their own microphones. Please also keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. Finally, if members have documents they wish to submit for the record, please email them to the committee clerk whose email address was circulated prior to the hearing. Good morning, and thank you to this excellent panel of witnesses who are joining us virtually today to discuss recent breakthroughs and next steps for the Department of Energy's fusion energy research activities. As our witnesses will be able to discuss in much more detail, fusion is the process that powers the sun and the stars. It is a simple fact that this fundamental phenomenon is essential to the existence of vital renewable energy sources like solar and wind energy, and indeed to life on Earth. For many decades, top scientists around the globe have worked to find ways to replicate the conditions enabled by the immense sheer gravity inside the core of a star to harness its potentially limitless source of clean energy more directly. There have been challenges and setbacks along the way, and significant challenges remain on the path toward realizing this transformative goal. But we now have new reasons for hope, as well as comprehensive roadmaps driven by the research community to guide us on this path. On August 8th, this past summer, the National Ignition Facility at DOE's Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory produced the first so-called burning plasma in a man-made experiment. A burning plasma is a condition in which the fusion process itself provides the primary heat source to sustain the fuel's high temperatures that keep the fusion process going. The achievement of a burning plasma is a critical step for the development of any viable fusion energy system. And on September 5th, less than a month later, Commonwealth Fusion Systems and its partners at MIT achieved a successful test of a high-temperature superconducting magnet up to a field strength of 20 Tesla, the most powerful magnetic field of its kind ever created on Earth. Such a magnet could enable fusion systems that are significantly smaller, lower cost, and faster to build than what was previously thought possible. I am also pleased to highlight that the fusion research community has stepped up in recent years to produce a long-range strategic plan, which this committee had directed the Department of Energy to initiate in the DOE Research and Innovation Act that was enacted in 2018. It is important for us in Congress to have a far better understanding of how the community would prioritize research activities and facility construction plans under a range of plausible budget scenarios. I recognize that tough decisions were made by the community in carrying out this effort, and hope that this hard and thorough work is better recognized in DOE's forthcoming budget requests for these programs. Thank you all again, and I look forward to this discussion. With that, I now recognize Mr. Weber for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Bowman, for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witness panel for joining us this morning. Today's topic is one that many of us are very familiar with, but we remain extremely intrigued by: fusion energy. In the most basic of terms, fusion energy aims to create the equivalent of a controlled sun and harness it as a power source here on Earth. Easy enough, right? But as you might imagine, the extreme temperatures, pressures, and confinement conditions required to do this also require a highly specialized environment. This makes achieving fusion energy one of the greatest challenges in experimental physics today. The potential benefits of a fusion reactor are beyond calculation. The fuel is abundant and widely accessible. The carbon footprint is functionally zero, and the radioactive waste concerns are almost non-existent. If we are serious about a clean energy future with low power sector emissions, there is no ambition that fits that bill better than fusion. The Department of Energy supports fusion R&D primarily through its Fusion Energy Sciences, or FES, program. In fiscal year 2021, the FES received $672 million, but the House passed bipartisan bill that I was proud to co-sponsor, the DOE Science for the Future Act, seeks to nearly double that by fiscal year 2026. This shows our overwhelming support for current research efforts and a bipartisan desire to leverage the untapped potential of fusion. I'd like to thank my colleague, Energy Subcommittee Chairman Bowman, as well as Ranking Member Lucas and Chairwoman Johnson for their leadership on this bill. Domestically, DOE funds a diverse portfolio of fusion energy research through its world-leading national laboratory system and cutting-edge experimental facilities and resources like the National Spherical Torus Experiment Upgrade at Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory and the National Ignition Facility at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. I look forward to hearing from esteemed representatives from these laboratories today. Internationally, DOE supports U.S. contributions to the ITER project, which many of you know is a major international collaboration to design, build, and operate a first-of-a-kind research facility to achieve and maintain a successful fusion reaction in the lab. Although it is located in beautiful southern France, a significant percentage of total U.S. awards and obligations to ITER are carried out, right here in the United States, funding research and component fabrication in American universities, national labs, and in industry. And while the U.S. contributes 13% of the cost of ITER, we will actually gain 100% of the scientific discoveries from this project. That's a good trade-off, a good deal in my estimation. This is why funding for ITER is also included in the DOE Science for the Future Act. Upholding our end of this deal is imperative to the success of U.S. fusion energy and to America's standing and credibility as a global scientific collaborator. I look forward to hearing more on this from Dr. Kathryn McCarthy, the director of the U.S. ITER Project Office, as our lights go out here. If we get fusion on board quickly enough, we won't have that problem. Did I mention we're working on that, Chairman Bowman? Another necessary contributor to fusion research is, of course, the private sector. Due to robust DOE investment in this critical science, there are already 13 fusion energy companies here in the U.S. today. We will hear from one of these companies, Commonwealth Fusion Systems, a startup aimed at commercializing fusion energy and has collaborated with the national labs through FES's Innovation Network for Fusion Energy, or the INFUSE program. Together, our witness panel represents unique areas of fusion energy research. They each have a story to tell on how we've progressed over the last decade and where we are headed in the next decade. No matter how you look at it, achieving commercial fusion energy technology is going to require strong U.S. leadership and consistent investment in discovery science. Meeting our goal of producing unlimited, emission-free power through fusion energy will truly take all of you here today. I want to thank again our witnesses for being here today and yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. The chair now recognizes the chairwoman of the full committee, Ms. Johnson, for an opening statement.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all. I appreciate you holding this hearing on fusion energy activities carried out by the Department of Energy. There are many of us on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee on both sides of the aisle that strongly believe that the promise of fusion energy is worth pursuing, and for that matter, warrants far greater support than the federal government has provided to date. Fusion has been the potential to deliver clean and abundant energy to the world, all while producing essentially no greenhouse gas emissions. I have previously noted that a breakthrough in fusion energy research would be a major step in enabling our clean energy future. And in fact, there's been a couple of significant breakthroughs within the last few months. So I'm pleased that we have witnesses here today who will discuss those in detail. And though there is still more work that needs to be done, the policy decisions and research investments we make now could well enable the next key advancements to come much sooner. Fusion energy research has had a long-standing support from the Science Committee. I'm proud to say that over the past few years, this committee has advanced numerous bills that provide significant direction for fusion research activities supported by the Department of Energy. These include substantial provisions in the Department of Energy Research and Innovation Act, as well as the Energy Act of 2020, both of which were signed into law. In June, the House passed the Department of Energy Science for the Future Act, a bill that I lead with Ranking Member Lucas and both Chairman Bowman and Ranking Member Weber of the Energy Subcommittee. This bill would expand upon previously authorized fusion energy activities, including strong authorization of appropriations for these programs. It includes full support for U.S. participation in ITER International Fusion Project. And I would say that Congressman Lucas and I have visited that project. And I would be remiss if I did not note that this committee included $1.24 billion in total funding for fusion energy R&D and $1.6 billion in total support for fusion facility construction and equipment in the text that it advances for the Build Back Better Act. I was also pleased to see the recent reports released by both Fusion Energy Services Advisory Committee and the National Academies. These reports outline strategic investments needed to enable a robust national fusion research program, including steps required to develop a pilot plant for fusion energy. Despite all of this progress made by Congress and the fusion research community, the Department of Energy has yet to implement much of the guidance provided by these external advisory reports, nor has DOE implemented much of the direction provided in law. We need to do better, especially at this time when there is so much more work to be done in this field. I very much look forward to the testimony today from this panel of distinguished witnesses. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you so much for your remarks, Chairwoman Johnson. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Lucas, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Bowen. Today, we have an opportunity to examine the status of fusion energy research in the United States. I look forward to hearing more about how we can provide robust support for these high priority research activities, both internationally and here at home. Fusion R&D has long enjoyed bipartisan support on the Science Committee, and for good reason. It is exactly the type of high risk, high reward basic research that expands our fundamental knowledge of science and technology and pushes the limits of what is possible. Fusion energy has the potential to produce discoveries that will transform our clean energy future, keeping American energy independent and at the same time the cutting edge of technological progress. To realize the promise of fusion energy, we must take an all of the above approach. We must support full funding for U.S. participation in ITER, the leading international research project for fusion energy. And we must make major investments in DOE national laboratories, like Princeton's Plasma Physics Laboratory and Lawrence Livermore's National Laboratory. And we must support productive partnerships with the rapidly growing U.S. fusion energy industry. Last Congress, we passed the Energy Act of 2020, which includes significant authorizations of DOE's fusion energy science activities, including an inertia fusion R&D program, fusion reactor system design activities, and an innovation network for fusion energy, and explicit direction for U.S. participation in ITER. Our bill, H.R. 3593, the Department of Energy Science for the Future Act, will build on the success of the Energy Act. Like that bill, DOE Science for the Future Act was overwhelmingly bipartisan. It's the product of years of hearings and discussions with stakeholders. The DOE Science for the Future Act is the first comprehensive authorization of DOE Office of Science. This legislation will invest $50 billion over 5 years, giving the Office of Science and our national laboratories the resources they need to continue to excel. This landmark legislation includes more than $5.6 billion for fusion energy sciences, extending and supplementing authorizations in the Energy Act. But it's not simply an authorization of research dollars. This legislation provides essential policy direction and strategic guidance for U.S. fusion energy R&D based on extensive stakeholder feedback and reports from the Fusion Energy Sciences Advisory Committee and the National Academies. This is a thoughtful, well-vetted, overwhelmingly bipartisan bill designed to significantly improve American research and development. The House approach to competitiveness legislation has been thoughtful, deliberate, and strategic. It makes smart investments to make continuous improvements to American research and development. So as discussions are starting about incorporating competitiveness legislation into the NDAA, I believe it's critical our priorities are included. This Congress, we've seen a lot of multi-trillion-dollar spending proposals come and go. We've heard a lot about so-called opportunities to cut corners and heavily compromise on our shared principles. The best path forward for fusion energy legislation is the DOE Science for the Future Act. We can't afford to accept, let's just be blunt about it, the Senate's half-baked proposal, and we can't afford to accept a social engineering bill with a fraction of our fusion energy investments, stripped of policy direction and long-term planning. I appreciate Chairman Johnson and Chairman Bowman's commitment to our shared goal of strengthening our investment in fusion energy, and I look forward to working together to get this bill signed into law. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today and for outlining their plans to make fusion energy a reality for the next generation. I look forward to a productive discussion. Thank you, Chairman Bowman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member Lucas, for your remarks. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I would like to introduce our witnesses. Dr. Troy Carter is a professor of physics and the director of the Plasma Science and Technology Institute at the University of California, Los Angeles. He chaired the Long-Range Planning Subcommittee of the DOE Office of Science's Fusion Energy Sciences Advisory Committee. Professor Carter is also the director of the Basic Plasma Science Facility, a collaborative research facility for fundamental plasma science supported by DOE and NSF. His research focuses on experimental studies and magnetized plasmas. Dr. Tammy Ma is the program element leader for high-intensity laser high-energy density science at the National Ignition Facility at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. This group pioneers the use of the highest intensity lasers in the world to investigate novel states of matter, study laboratory astrophysics, and explore fusion physics. Dr. Robert Mumgaard is the CEO of Commonwealth Fusion Systems. CFS is a private commercial fusion company with the goal of commercializing a high magnetic field approach to fusion. Dr. Mumgaard performed his PhD work at MIT, where he substantially contributed to the development of this approach. Dr. Kathryn McCarthy is the U.S. ITER project director, as well as the associate laboratory director for fusion and fission energy and science at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. She served on the Fusion Energy Sciences Advisory Committee from 1999 to 2013 and on the U.S. ITER Technical Advisory Committee from 2010 to 2013, and has held numerous leadership positions in the American Nuclear Society. Dr. McCarthy joined Oak Ridge National Laboratory after 3 years as laboratory director for the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. She previously held a variety of engineering and leadership roles at Idaho National Laboratory. Dr. Stephen Cowley is the 7th director of the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory and a Princeton professor of astrophysical sciences. Prior to joining PPPL, He was president of Corpus Christi College and a professor of physics at the University of Oxford. Dr. Cowley previously was chief executive officer of the United Kingdom Atomic Energy Authority and head of the Cullum Center for Fusion Energy. From 2011 to 2017, he was a member of the UK Prime Minister's Council on Science and Technology and was even knighted by the Queen of England in 2018. So we should actually call you Sir Dr. Stephen Cowley. My apologies, sir. Thank you all for joining us today. As our witnesses should know, you will each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing. When you all have completed your spoken testimony, we will begin with questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. We will start with Dr. Carter. Dr. Carter, please begin.
Thank you. Chairman Bowen, Ranking Member Weber of the Subcommittee, Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas of the full committee, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for holding this hearing and for providing me and my colleagues with the opportunity to testify. My name is Troy Carter. I'm the director of the Plasma Science and Technology Institute and professor of physics at UCLA. I serve on the DOE Office of Sciences Fusion Energy Sciences Advisory Committee, or FESAC. I'm speaking today in my capacity as an academic researcher and not here to formally represent UCLA or FESAC. As was already mentioned, I recently chaired a FESAC subcommittee that was charged with developing a long-range plan for fusion energy and plasma science research for DOE. The resulting consensus report, Powering the Future, Fusion and Plasmas, was a result of a 2-year strategic planning process with strong engagement from the entire research community, including universities, national labs, and industry. The report represents a 10-year strategy for both fusion energy development and for advancing plasma science and related technologies. I'll focus my brief comments here on fusion energy strategy in that report. I'd be happy to take questions on broader plasma science and engineering. The main message I want you to take away from my remarks is that now is the time to move aggressively towards the development and deployment of fusion energy. Fusion will provide carbon-free, safe electricity generation that can substantially power society and mitigate climate change. Why are we confident that now is the right time? There's been important scientific and technological process coupled with a strongly growing private sector that positions us to realize a unique US vision for economical fusion energy with the goal of an electricity producing fusion pilot plant. This unique vision was first laid out in the 2019 National Academies Report, a strategic plan for US burning plasma research, and is endorsed by our FESAC report and also by the 2021 National Academies Report, Bringing Fusion to the US Grid. The strong and steady support for fusion energy research, including from this committee and Congress, thank you, has enabled important recent scientific progress and breakthroughs. Several examples of this progress is outlined in our report. For example, advances in our understanding of fusion plasmas, achievement of new performance records. They will also be brought up by Professor Cowley in this hearing. Here I'll offer a few highlights that have occurred since the report was published, and a couple of them have already been brought up in the opening remarks. First is the recent breakthrough at the National Ignition Facility. Just this past summer, where record gain was achieved. And this was enabled by recently acquired scientific understanding. Dr. Ma will discuss this very important result. Second is the recent demonstration by Commonwealth Fusion Systems of a high temperature superconducting, or HTS magnet, the largest of its kind in the world, operating at 20 Tesla that was mentioned earlier. Dr. Mumgaard will discuss this breakthrough that is really a game changer for fusion. Finally, there's been important progress with the International ITER project, with the delivery of the first 2 magnet modules for the ITER central solenoid. This solenoid will be the largest low temperature superconducting magnet in the world, and Dr. McCarthy will talk more about this achievement of the US ITER project office that she leads and General Atomics. Alongside this technical progress, we've seen rapid growth of private sector investment in fusion energy. The ultimate goal of fusion energy research in the US is development of a US commercial fusion power industry, and that industry is already taking root. At the time of the writing of our report, about $2 billion had been invested worldwide in fusion energy development in the private sector, resulting in the launch of several startup fusion companies. There's been new investment since, with just in the last few weeks, $500 million more announced and more is coming. This investment has enabled the startup companies to make impressive progress on development of new fusion facilities and create enabling technologies such as the HTS magnet I mentioned earlier. The scientific and progress and technical know-how developed through the federal program enabled the founding of these companies. And we now have the opportunity to amplify federal investment through partnering. Through this partnership, we can accelerate the timeline and reduce the cost to develop fusion electricity. If you look at our international colleagues in the UK and China, there's already a lot of money flowing into such partnership programs. And they've successfully attracted private fusion companies through that investment. It's imperative that the US develops and implements new models, strengthens existing ones for partnership between the public and private sectors. The consensus FESAC long-range planning report makes recommendations for actions that DOE should take to reorient the US fusion program toward the rapid development of fusion energy. It enumerates and prioritizes urgently needs research programs and experimental facilities. This committee in Congress had implored our community to come together and create a new strategic plan for fusion. We have now answered that charge and speak with one voice in support of the resulting strategic plan. Now's the time to act. We need to implement the plan. I want to thank this committee for authorization language in the Science for the Future Act and in the current reconciliation bill that is well aligned with priorities expressed in our report. We're ready to get to work on making fusion power a reality and look forward to DOE implementing our plan. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. Dr. Ma, you are now recognized.
Thank you. Chairman Bauman, Ranking Member Weber of the subcommittee, Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas of the full committee, and all members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to offer testimony on fostering a new era of fusion energy research. I am the Program Element Leader for High Intensity Laser, High Energy Density Science, the National Ignition Facility at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. I have submitted my full statement to the committee, which I asked to be made part of the hearing record. If I may, I will now summarize in a brief opening statement. The National Ignition Facility, or NIF, is the world's largest, most energetic laser housed in a football stadium-sized facility. The 192 very energetic laser beams of NIF are focused onto a miniature capsule the size of a BB containing fusion fuel. The lasers heat and compress the fuel to conditions hotter and denser than those found at the center of the sun. The goal is ignition, more energy out than we put in with the lasers. This past August, a breakthrough fusion yield of 1.35 megajoules was achieved on the NIF, more than 2/3 of the 1.9 megajoules of the laser energy going in. This equates to an energy gain of 70% of that needed for ignition and represents a 25x improvement over experiments from a year ago. The tremendous progress over previous results were made possible by numerous experiments, advances in diagnostics and targets, improved laser precision, overall better understanding of the fusion physics, and a very dedicated team of individuals. This result now places NIF on the threshold of fusion ignition in the laboratory for the first time and demonstrates the feasibility of laboratory-scale laser-driven inertial confinement fusion to achieve high fusion yield conditions. While the central mission of the NIF is to provide experimental insight and data for the National Nuclear Security Administration's Science-Based Stockpile Stewardship Program, these same fusion plasmas that we create for national security applications can also be exploited to be the basis of a future clean power source by inertial fusion energy. Developing an economically attractive approach to fusion energy is a grand scientific and engineering challenge. It is, without a doubt, a monumental undertaking, but the potential payoff is even greater. Clean, limitless, reliable energy that can not only help address the urgent issue of climate change, but can also provide energy sovereignty and security for the US. The profound benefits of future humanity impels us to support a vigorous and sustained research program into fusion with a diverse portfolio that maximizes our potential pathways to success. Inertial fusion energy is one such innovative approach with significantly different technological risks to mainstream magnetic fusion energy research. With the recent game-changing results on the NIF, and our decades of expertise in inertial fusion science and technology, the US is well poised to lead and capitalize on the potential of inertial fusion. However, there is currently no inertial fusion energy program in the US, and it is not part of the long-term energy R&D portfolio, but should be. A number of promising technologies key to eventual inertial fusion energy systems are already making steady progress. In particular, there have been exciting advances in high-energy rep-rated laser and pulse power technology in the US, potentially lowering the cost of a future driver for a fusion energy system. Additive and advanced manufacturing are revolutionizing new materials and techniques critical to fusion energy. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are being deployed to train high-performance computational models and improve predictive simulation capabilities. The National Academy of Sciences in 2013 released a report entitled An Assessment of the Prospects for Inertial Fusion Energy. Amongst the many excellent recommendations was that the appropriate time for the establishment of a national, coordinated, broad-based inertial fusion energy program within DOE would be when ignition is achieved. This is the time to begin as we stand at that threshold. Inertial fusion energy is a multi-decadal endeavor, and realizing it will not be easy. It will require the best minds and bold leadership, but it is a worthy challenge, and that is exactly where we as a nation excel. Now is the time to reestablish a vibrant national inertial fusion energy program and ignite a credible development path towards clean fusion energy. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Ma. Dr. Mumgaard, you are now recognized.
Chairman Bowman, Ranking Member Weber, and other distinguished members of the subcommittee, my name is Bob Mumgaard. I'm appearing before you today as the CEO of Commonwealth Fusion Systems. I'm also a board member of the Fusion Industry Association. I'd like to thank the subcommittee for this opportunity to provide an update on the status and prospects of commercial fusion energy. After years of study, we are now at the beginning of fusion's transition from a science to commercialization. Fortunately, we are building off of a strong base set by basic research funded by the government. Commercial fusion energy could be a game changer in the clean energy transition, and if fusion is to make an impact, it will necessarily create an entirely new industry at the scale of the semiconductor or aerospace industry, with important companies like similar to Boeing and Intel. The future fusion industry will bring manufacturing, skilled jobs, and exports. And importantly, we get to decide how that industry will work. We can build in inclusion, diversity, equality at the outset of a technology that is inherently environmentally just. Unfortunately, as I look across the U.S. publicly funded program, it's no longer clear that the U.S. has broad world leadership. Much of the program in the U.S. today looks the way it looked 10 years ago. We risk stagnation at the time the rest of the world has aggressively moved forward. The UK, Germany, Japan, Italy, they are building facilities first conceived by the U.S. China is rapidly investing. The UK has a government-wide goal to be first and is already siting their first plant. However, from where I sit, I see three reasons why I'm very optimistic the U.S. can create a definitive lead in this new industry. First, the growth of the private sector. Over $2.4 billion in private capital has been invested in the fusion companies that now number nearly 30. This is a similar amount of capital as in all the nuclear fission small modular reactor companies. This is coming from a large range of investors across venture capitalists, to university endowments, to large energy companies. And they are putting capital at risk in fusion because they understand that the world needs a fundamentally new source of clean energy if we are going to meet our decarbonization goals. And these companies are highly ambitious, with a recent survey stating that 84% of them believe that fusion will be on the grid in the 2030s or earlier. They are now building large facilities that over the next few years will be world leading. And CFS is an example of such a company. We have benefited from public investment in fusion science with our history at MIT. Our approach is based on the scientifically proven tokamak, similar to the design to ITER. But in our case, we've used new technology, new developed, successfully demonstrated high temperature superconducting magnets that allow us to shrink that tokamak to 1/40th the size of ITER. And CFS is currently building this next machine, Spark, at a site in Devens, Massachusetts. And based on peer-reviewed publications, we have high confidence that Spark will be a net energy fusion machine and will achieve burning plasmas, which we aim to do in 2025, much earlier than people thought was possible. And after that, we will proceed with the commercialization of our first fusion pilot plant called ARC. We have hoped to have that online in the early 2030s, and we're starting to engage customers and we have interest. In fact, since the last House hearing on fusion, we have doubled 6 times over, and we will double again this year. We will not wait to make decisions. We are executing. And we are not alone. The other companies like TAE and General Fusion, Helion, Tokamak Energy are looking at similar timeframes and experiencing similar growth. All of these companies are looking to see which governments are going to be the best partners. And unfortunately, we are already seeing defections with a major facility that could have been built in the US instead being built in the UK. It would be much better if the US public program leveraged the private sector, aligning with the technical goals and timelines to keep it happening here. The second reason I'm optimistic is that the public program has produced a consensus plan detailed in the National Academies and FESAC recommendations, is a transition of the public funded program towards the U.S. developing commercial energy. We need to stop some activities and transition to others, but the researchers are enthusiastic and they are ready. We have a new generation of leaders at national laboratories and universities hungry to develop that technology. And that plan has been authorized, but has not yet been implemented. And in order to be a world leader, we need to implement that plan and increase its speed aggressively. The third reason I'm hopeful is the movement towards public-private partnerships. And we know that when the public and private sectors work together and recognize what each side is good at, we create vibrant ecosystems. We saw this in commercial space with NASA and SpaceX. We saw it even more recently with the COVID-19 vaccine. Working together, we can drastically reduce timelines to not just first of a kind, but large markets. And the recent acts have just such a milestone-based program for fusion, and that needs to be implemented. Commercial fusion energy is within our grasp as a viable source of clean energy, led by the U.S. if we act now. I'm very excited to have this panel and have this committee take a look at this and open the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mumgaard. Dr. McCarthy, you are now recognized.
Thank you very much. Chairman Bowman and Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Weber and Ranking Member Lucas, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to discuss fusion energy. My name is Kathy McCarthy. I'm the Associate Laboratory Director for Fusion and Fission Energy and Science at Oak Ridge National Laboratory and Director of the U.S. ITER project. The world is facing an urgent climate and energy crisis. Here in the U.S., we need a multi-pronged approach to meet our climate and energy goals. Today's nuclear energy from fission reactors provides abundant baseload carbon-free energy. Sustaining our current fleet is key to bridging to the near-term option, which is advanced nuclear reactors. Both current and advanced nuclear reactors are supported by the recently passed infrastructure bill, and ORNL is proud to play key roles in each. But nuclear fusion is still the holy grail for energy. Fusion has the potential to provide abundant, safe, carbon-free energy for thousands of years and beyond. The path to fusion energy has benefited from a number of recent advances, including expanded scientific understanding of fusion plasmas, key to preparing for ITER operations, ITER tokamak assembly and overall progress. The U.S. has already delivered the first 2 modules for the heart of ITER, the central solenoid magnet. Exciting results from the National Ignition Facility at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, accelerated understanding of plasma performance thanks to high-performance computing, and progress in the fusion industry with signs of a successful leveraging of national laboratory expertise. It's important to have multiple paths to fusion under development, given how challenging it is. Having multiple approaches reduces risk. Our investment in ITER remains vital to U.S. fusion goals. The recent National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine report, Bringing Fusion to the U.S. Grid, states that technology and research results from U.S. investments in ITER, coupled with the strong foundation of research funded by the Department of Energy, position the United States to begin planning for its first fusion pilot plant. Much of the experience gained through the ITER process is relevant to a pilot plant, regardless of its configuration. Already, the challenge of designing, fabricating, delivering, and assembling first-of-a-kind components into the ITER tokamak is yielding practical fusion reactor experience. Domestic supply chains are being developed, fabrication challenges are being resolved, and integration issues are being addressed, all to assemble the world's first nuclear-certified fusion reactor. In addition, the U.S. workforce in fusion leadership is being maintained and further developed. For about 9% towards construction costs and 13% towards operation costs, the United States receives 100% of ITER science, technology, and associated intellectual property. Recent reports from the scientific and engineering community have shown that the U.S. is now ready to add significant attention to fusion technology to develop a practical path to a fusion pilot plant. I was a member of the National Academies Committee that authored the report on bringing fusion to the U.S. grid. Our report emphasizes the need for investment in several areas to put the U.S. on a competitive path for a future fusion energy industry. Our final report states that successful operation of a pilot plant in the 2035 to 2040 timeframe requires urgent investments by DOE and private industry, both to resolve the remaining technical and scientific issues and to design, construct, and commission a pilot plant. In addition to what we gain from ITER, a path to a pilot plant demands operations of facilities such as the D3D tokamak at General Atomics in California and the Material Plasma Exposure Experiment, MPEX, now under construction at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Additional technology testing facilities and innovations are needed as outlined in the report, such as a prototypic neutron source for testing of advanced structural and functional materials, integrated first wall and blanket testing to advance fuel producing technology readiness, and innovations in boundary plasma science, fueling technologies, and gas processing. All of these efforts will help fusion reach commercial viability. US ITER, Oak Ridge, and many of our other national laboratories are making crucial contributions to advance fusion science and technology and are engaged with industry to solve these challenges. These efforts, with an increased focus on fusion technology, position our nation to include nuclear fusion in our long-term carbon-free energy portfolio. Thank you for your interest and your time today. I welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. McCarthy. At this time, we will begin our first round of questions. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Dr. Carter, thank you for your testimony. You stated that the overarching message that you want to convey today is that now is the time to move aggressively towards the development and deployment of fusion energy. Can you say more about what is unique about this particular moment in the course of fusion energy development in comparison to, say, 5 years ago or 20 years ago? And can we really expect fusion to make a real contribution to climate action in the United States? For example, given how quickly we need to get to a zero carbon grid?
Thanks for the question. I would say this, the landscape has changed dramatically over the last decade. I'll reiterate what I said in my brief remarks. There are really 3 reasons for why the time is now: the scientific and technical progress that I outlined that positions us to make the next step, the growth of the private sector, that is tremendously important, puts into place interest from the private sector in pushing commercialization. And another thing that's very important that we lacked even 5 years ago was a vision and a strategy within the US program to execute and develop fusion energy. To elaborate more briefly, we've advanced significantly in our predictive capabilities for fusion plasmas. We've used these to reach record magnetically confined pressure in tokamaks, for example. Use that understanding to enable the record NIF shot that I mentioned. Reiterate these CFS results. And again, this is really a game changer for fusion, as Bob pointed out, opening up the operating space for fusion energy. Again, to reiterate the strategy, we hadn't developed a new strategy since maybe the early 2000s. The program had been proceeding as a science program. We didn't really have a vision for where to go. With the National Academy's report in 2019 and the recent report by FESAC and by the National Academies bringing fusion to the US grid, we now have a consensus vision for where fusion energy development needs to go in the US, and this is incredibly important.
Thank you. Dr. McCarthy, you discuss how fusion energy is a natural progression in the development of nuclear energy technology. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on why fusion energy is the next step beyond advanced fission vision. What are the potential benefits of fusion compared to fission, including with respect to safety concerns and the challenges associated with radioactive waste?
So absolutely. First of all, and you heard a little bit about this already, fusion has the potential to provide practically limitless energy. The fuel is readily available, and the byproducts of the fuel, byproducts of the reaction, are neutrons and helium for a traditional deuterium-tritium fuel cycle, which themselves are not radioactive, but do produce some radioactivity when neutrons, for example, are absorbed by structural materials. But that radioactivity that results from the fusion operation does not have to be isolated for the long periods of time that fission reactor waste needs to be isolated. So that would be one of the advantages. With respect to safety, fusion reactors are naturally safe in terms of shutting themselves down and don't pose the hazard of widespread release of radioactivity. And I think, one of the important things, and I think it might have been Troy or Tammy that touched on this a little bit, is energy justice. This fuel, as I said earlier, is readily available and broadly available both nationally and internationally. So I think those are a few of the reasons why it's the natural progression beyond fission.
Thank you very much. And my apologies to everyone. I seem to have skipped Sir Dr. Stephen Cowley's testimony. My bad. Someone on my team will be fired today. Dr. Cowley, please provide your testimony. I am so sorry, sir. I will send you flowers. Please forgive me.
The flowers are not necessary. So, Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas, Subcommittee Chairman Bowman, Ranking Member Weber, and committee members. Thank you very much for the invitation to testify today. I am the director of the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory and a professor of astrophysics at Princeton University, which manages PPPL, the lead national laboratory for fusion and plasma physics. The entire fusion community is deeply grateful to this committee for its long-standing commitment to the development of fusion energy. It is an honor indeed to appear before you. We've heard from several people that fusion is very desirable, but do we need fusion? The short answer is yes. Reaching net zero by mid-century will require hundreds of gigawatts of zero carbon firm electrical generating capacity. Firm means sources that are not dependent on the sun or wind and can be switched on and off at will. As my Princeton colleague Jesse Jenkins emphasized at a recent PCAST hearing, a truly sustainable firm energy source is needed. Fusion is one of the very few options, and perhaps the best, to meet that need, and it is therefore essential that we move to realize fusion electricity production as fast as possible. I am more optimistic than at any time during my career that we're on the home stretch to fusion electricity. Why? This hasn't really been mentioned. The last decade has seen a huge change in our scientific understanding of fusion systems. In particular, the advances in theory, algorithms, and high-performance computing have finally made it possible to predict the turbulence that dominates all fusion experiments and has, frankly, frustrated progress. This is a fiendishly difficult problem, and its solution is a triumph of the DOE-funded program. But it's more than an intellectual breakthrough. For the first time, it is now possible to design and optimize fusion systems on the computer. Current fusion reactor designs all require innovations to make them viable candidates for the first generation of fusion plants. The Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory, with industry and university partners, is addressing the need by combining model virtual engineering and the latest fusion science to innovate computationally. This modern methodology has been remarkably successful in industry, from the new space industry to the automobile industry, and it's a powerful new tool to shorten the time to fusion electricity. So what should we do now to hasten the arrival of fusion electricity? Dr. McCarthy has emphasized the central importance of ITER, and Dr. Carter has described the community consensus plan, which the leadership of this committee has wisely requested. I will highlight some aspects of the plan. The National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine earlier this year published a report bringing fusion to the US grid. That report has two recommendations. And the first one is a very clear, ambitious goal. The Department of Energy and the private sector should produce net electricity in a fusion plant in the United States in the 2035-2040 timeframe. The first step towards this goal is contained in the author's second recommendation. DOE should move forward now to foster the creation of national teams, including public-private partnerships, that will develop conceptual pilot plant designs and technology roadmaps that will lead us to an engineering design of a pilot plant that will bring fusion to commercial viability. This is the key. We must urgently form these teams and develop these conceptual designs. It is critical, if we're to deliver fusion fast, that several conceptual designs are developed. We need to let the ideas compete. By driving design choices in a modern virtual environment, we can work backwards to determine what must be done now. Attractive pilot plants demand high confinement. Thus, the promise of superior confinement on the National Spherical Tokamak Experiment upgrade under construction at Princeton, and the remarkably high performance of the D3 tokamak at General Atomics, really the highest performing tokamak in the world in terms of per unit mass, if you like, must be cornerstones of the US program. Cornerstones that will help ITER succeed and reduce the cost and scale of fusion pilot plants. Finally, we need to accelerate, first, the development of fusion materials for a fusion power plant. Second, the technology for making electricity from fusion heat. And third, the systems to breed and separate the fusion fuel tritium in the plant. These issues have been set aside while we develop the plasma confinement systems. If we are to speed fusion electricity delivery, these issues can and should be addressed in parallel with enhancing confinement and the designs of pilot plants. This committee had the wisdom to authorize the activities described above in the Energy Act of 2020, and more recently, the Department of Energy Science for the Future Act. We look forward to full implementation and funding of these activities, which will indeed accelerate the arrival of fusion electricity. Thank you again for your support, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cowley. I now recognize Mr. Weber for 5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Gosh, I don't, pardon me, quite know where to start. I'll start backwards, I guess, with Dr. Cowley, although you said he's been knighted. So we're supposed to call him sir. What I want to know from Dr. Cowley is whenever he testifies, does he get like a surcharge? That's what I want to know. Dr. Cowley, you said something very interesting. You actually put a time frame on it, a 2035 to 2040 time frame. Are supercomputers going to be needed to hit that time frame?
Absolutely. That's the big advantage we have now that we didn't have, 25 years ago. And it's what the Department of Energy has spent a great deal of time developing. Yes, if you look at the way engineering is developed in the new space industry and
you're about to die. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, and also in the new development of new nuclear reactors, it's the use of the computer to shorten the development time is absolutely critical. Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, thank you for that. I'm getting a note that my AirPods here are low on battery. So let me jump over to Dr. Carter, if I may. Well, first of all, let me say it's no secret U.S. leadership in fusion research is being threatened by large investments made by other nations. Luckily, I'm of the opinion, I think we would all agree, that the U.S. has the advantage of extensive public-private partnerships. In fact, one of the witnesses said that. This makes it easy for companies wanting to pursue fusion energy to utilize the DOE's world-class facilities and research. The more players in the game, the higher the likelihood someone succeeds. And in fact, Dr. Cowley, or Sir Dr. Cowley, you said that several critical designs needed to be developed and then work backwards to pick the best one. So I'm encouraged that we're all kind of on that same wavelength. But I want to go to Dr. Carter. Dr. Carter, based on your work chairing the FES Long Range Planning Subcommittee, can you give us a sense of what level of investment is required to compete with these international investments, please?
Well, I can just comment on what we're seeing in the landscape elsewhere. One important program that's been brought up already in the UK is the STEP program. That investment over the next few years is on the order of $500 million. $500 million, sorry, dollars to really kick that program off. It's also been that level of funding has helped attract companies. So as was already mentioned, General Fusion decided to site their program at the Cowley Labs because of that, the resources provided and the ability to be there. But you look more broadly beyond that one program, the U.S. is falling behind. The level of investment that was authorized by this committee is the level of investment that will put us on the right path, that accelerated path, and put us in line more with what the investment is across the world. You look at China, the investment there is also tremendous, both on the public and private sector. And they're basically building one of everything is their approach to try. And those devices they're building are devices that are ideas that have come out of the US program. In a sense, UK and China are beating us to the punch on our own plan for fusion energy development.
Well, so with that in mind, thank you. This is for all witnesses. I don't have a clock in front of me. I don't know how much, Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have left?
1 minute, 25 seconds.
Okay, if we cannot match other nations dollar for dollar, what steps, if any, can we take to maximize the investment of dollars do we have? And Dr. McCarthy, I'll go back to you.
So I think what's really important, this has been brought up, is these public-private partnerships. And I'll emphasize the national teams that Dr. Cowley talked about, because each of these members of these teams brings in a different sort of perspective. Industry has the goal-driven point. National laboratories have a breadth of expertise that doesn't exist elsewhere. Universities have the broad or the deep research expertise. You put all of that together, a diverse team that looks at things from different angles. That's what's got to happen, because these are very challenging problems to solve. Each of these areas has very challenging problems to solve. So I would say that is the place to go. Programs like Infuse, which already exists, but potentially a larger Infuse program.
Okay, thank you. Then Dr. Mumgaard, same question for you.
Yeah, I echo the other panelists that for the U.S. to succeed, we're not going to be able to just match China dollar for dollar. We're going to have to leverage what we're really good at, and what we're really good at in the United States is really at the intersection of different fields and different types of enterprises. So entrepreneurship has shown over and over again that can pick winners and that can take risks and move very, very quickly. At the same time, it's not going to do what the national labs do in terms of the deep expertise. It's not going to replace the universities. So if you put them together, you get a really, really powerful combination. And we've seen that in pharmaceuticals with NIH working with the pharmaceutical companies. We've seen that in aerospace. We've seen that over and over again, that's how you produce really the fastest, least resource intensive path to a solution, and particularly a solution that can win the market. It's not good enough just to build a pilot plant. We need to build a pilot plant that people want to buy. And then we need to make a pilot plant that people can build many, many of. And so you need that whole spectrum all in one spot. And the U.S. is historically very good at that.
Well, good. I appreciate that. And Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Ms. Stevens is recognized.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to panelists for just a great hearing. Obviously, in your testimonies, you touched on and cited legislation by this committee to better guide the Department of Energy's fusion research activities. This obviously includes the committee's DOE Science for the Future Act, which our chair discussed, as well as significant investments in fusion R&D and facility construction that we included in the contribution to the Build Back Better Act. Just wanted to take a scope from a handful of you, Dr. Ma, Dr. Mumgaard, Dr. Carter, and Dr. Cowley. What might we be missing from legislation at this point? Gaps in the laws that we should be considering to address at this point? Dr. Ma, go ahead.
Thank you for the question. I'll just start by saying we're very, very appreciative of the support of the House and in particular this committee for both the long-term sustained funding for the NIF and for your commitment to establishing an inertial fusion energy program. There are a few areas that I know the fusion community would like a little more support on. I'll actually hand it over to Dr. Carter to touch on.
I can take it from there. I'll add my thanks. I think these laws align very well and bills with what the priorities are expressed in the report. Extremely helpful. Where we may need more help, and I think this I'll pass to Dr. Mumgaard to expand on. I think we need ways to expand and improve and better ways to partner with the private sector to really get this done. So any help we can get to improve that within the DOE would be helpful. The other issue I'll raise is to accelerate the timeline. We need to find ways to speed up development of needed facilities, experimental and testing facilities. So currently, we can look at a decade or more to get an important facility built in the current framework. We need to speed that up. And likely the answer there too is finding ways to partner with the private sector. So any assistance in those two issues would be very helpful.
Yeah, I'd agree with the legislation has been extremely helpful. It's given clear directives. It's set the United States on a strategy. And it's an authorized new facilities, but we haven't implemented it yet. So if you actually look at what is in the DOE budget proposal, it's not aligned with the legislation. So we've got to get that fixed. I know that's not the role here, but it is something that we're very excited to see happen. Additionally, there are some elements that have been proposed that we need to maybe tune a little bit. So for instance, the public-private partnerships. There's multiple ways to do that. And we've seen that get tried across the DOE, across the NASA. And if we think creatively about how to do that, things like other transaction authorities, things like new temporary types of offices and or programs inside the DOE, we can probably tune these pretty well to get really the best of both worlds. And the key challenge being that this is new to the DOE Office of Fusion Energy Sciences, that this is not what we've done previously. So we have to learn new skills, but we can pull those skills in from, say, RPE, which the legislation did say go work with RPE and NE. So those types of expansive, collaborative, new types of thinking about how to set up programs, that's very, very helpful.
Yeah, and the clock's back. Okay, let's see. I've got 1:20. It's hard to tell where I am on the time, but I guess my follow-up question to all this, and thank you, really helpful feedback there, and always interesting when we try and engage in the directive of the public-private partnership space. But I'm curious about that last point that you were making, Dr. Mumgaard, about costs and materials, and particularly as Dr. Cowley, just answered a question related to high performance computing. Supercomputing is very expensive. What else do we need to know about the accessibility of materials, costs, storage, access points, multi-state collaborations, things along those lines?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Fundamentally, fusion is intriguing because the materials that a fusion machine is made out of are steel and concrete. And so in the long run, it should be economic. It's if we get better.
Well, steel is expensive now, though, Dr. Mum.
Yes, but per unit, if you think about it in terms of per unit of energy produced, it's much lower than even a fossil industry building in terms of the capital. Amount of steel that's in there. So you have an advantage over the long run. And over the near term, though, reiterating what Dr. Cowley said, the advances in computing mean that you don't have to build as many machines up front, which you can do many more experiments in the computer than you can in real life. And that's a big time saver and a big cost saver, even though it might be the case that supercomputing.
Well, the access might be expensive, but I'm out of time. Thank you, Dr. Mumgaard. Really looking forward to the rest of the questions today. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll yield back.
Mr. Lucas is recognized. Mr. Garcia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. Very interesting, intriguing technologies, and I think many of you are hitting it right on the head. Very hopeful era in our nation's path to clean energy, sustainable clean energy. Dr. Ma, I want to touch on what you are doing, this gain of energy of 70% that you've achieved. Can you talk to sort of what are the next incremental goals that your team is looking to achieve? And then also, can you talk to this is a record that's tied a previous achievement out of the UK, right? But they did this back in 1997. So can you kind of give us a lay of the land as where our, I'll call them competitor nations are in this progress? What led to the UK effectively stalling out at 0.7 and not achieving higher, or have they in other forms and other technologies? And what do we need to do either differently or in addition to what's already been done in order to get to ignition? Just kind of give us an overview of the roadmap to at least 100% ignition.
Thank you, Representative Garcia, for the question. This achievement that we've achieved of a gain of 0.7 means that we've effectively gotten close to the same amount of energy out of the target that we put in with the laser. From a physics perspective, what that means is we have been able to start use a flame front to basically start the ignition of a piece of wood to burn. So effectively, we are there. The next steps for us here on the NIF are we are repeating the shot now to demonstrate robustness, repeatability, make sure that we understand the physics performance and the key metrics to affect that performance. We do believe that with the NIF, we will be able to demonstrate much higher gains coming up. And in fact, this is part of our NNSA mission to achieve very high fusion yields for those missions. You're right that this does compare to a result out of the UK back in 1997 on a tokamak. However, our result on the NIF is the first time that we have had what we call a burning plasma, where the energy coming out of the plasma exceeds the thermal heating that went in. And now the burn is very robust. And so it's like that flame on that piece of wood growing. I will have to defer to my colleagues to explain why that result has stalled on the tokamaks. I'm not completely clear, but I think we all know that with the current progress that we've had in emerging technologies, computation, as Dr. Mumgaard has referred to, we're poised to make a lot of great progress soon.
Is it fair to say that 200% or so is a rough target to effectively offset some of the efficiency losses through the process for actually having greater energy out versus in, or is that not fair? Sir Cowley, I see you there looking to speak. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, I guess I should speak up for the UK result. I used to run that facility, and it was, of course, an immense result in '97. But the result on NIF is actually very interesting because the heat from the fusion is contributing to the gain, whereas that wasn't true in the European facility in 1997. And that's what we mean by burning. And so, if this can be improved at NIF, they will be making most of the fusion happen because they made fusion happen. And that's the goal that we really want to do. Now, what happened in the UK program was that those results resulted in the design of ITER. Because ITER is that machine's called JET, the Joint European Torus, and ITER is just 2 times JET. And that shape and that design is, at higher field, for instance, is roughly what Spark is. That's the most common configuration at that time, and it's really been sparked by those 1997 results on JET.
Great. Okay, so we are leveraging it and synergizing. I'm out of time, Mr. Chair. I'll yield back.
Mr. McNerney is recognized.
Well, I thank the chair. I thank the witnesses. I've been a long time and enthusiastic supporter of fusion energy, starting with work at Los Alamos National Labs when I was a grad student. And I believe fusion development is moving quickly, and that once commercially available, will be an important contributor to our baseload power needs. The national labs, higher educational institutes, private companies in the United States are performing some of the most critical and groundbreaking technology in fusion in the world. So in testimony today, we've heard about 2 of the US-based magnetic fusion facilities. I was fortunate earlier this year to visit the D3D in San Diego and witness some impressive research. Dr. Cowley, in your testimony, you mentioned the promise of D3D, tokamak, and the work at Princeton. How important is the continued improvement of both of these facilities to the nascent U.S. fusion enterprise, and what scale investments do you think are necessary?
The D3D tokamak, pound for pound, is the highest performing machine in the world. And that's because US scientific leadership has allowed us to understand how to optimize the situation. And one of the things that we need to understand is that fusion will be cheaper if we can make confinement better. And that's really been pushed forward immensely by General Atomics. The machine we're building at Princeton is to try and leverage that in a more compact configuration so that we can make smaller, cheaper, faster fusion devices. It's true that we may have enough confinement now to go all the way to fusion, but if we get more confinement, it'll be a better fusion reactor when we get there. And so it's very critical to keep the confinement program going, because that way we'll get the best out of ITER and we'll get the best out of our pilot plants.
Thank you. Do you think there's any policy change that would facilitate the D3D program?
Well, I think that it would be good to see D3D get an upgrade, because I think that the team that works there has had some of the most amazing breakthroughs in the science. And this is not my team, so I can say it from a distance. And to keep that going as we're approaching ITER operation, by giving some kind of upgrade to that device would be, I think, would greatly improve our chances of getting the best out of ITER, for instance, and the best out of Spark, and the best out of the pilot plant.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Ma. It's good to see you this morning. I visited the NIF on multiple occasions, starting in 2007, and was more than excited to hear about the breakthrough this August. In your testimony, you commented on how the mission at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab imposes limits on what research can be pursued at the lab. Do you have recommendations for how LLNL and other national lab sites can translate breakthroughs like the one at Livermore this August into long-term fusion energy?
Thank you for the question. The result that we recently had on the NIF demonstrates the basic scientific feasibility of laser-driven inertial fusion. And with that, we can now start to also validate our simulation codes in this regime of very high neutron yields. And it gives us a great amount of confidence that we can now use our codes to further scale to different ignition designs and test out alternative concepts. Now, the NIF is currently the leading experimental capability for studying these ignition schemes relevant to inertial fusion energy at near to full scale. And so because of that, it's very valuable, and we should absolutely use it to test out other experimental concepts that can help advance our overall physics understanding and continue to validate our simulation codes.
So how is artificial intelligence being used?
That's a wonderful question. Our experiments are so incredibly complex. There's sometimes 10,000 different physics parameters that might go into defining a particular experiment. So we absolutely need to use high performance computing to help us to do the best experiment possible, and use artificial intelligence and machine learning to get a better handle on all of those different physics parameters, and use that also for advanced capabilities such as multimodal data understanding. So taking in all our different types of information and building a more complete picture. And then also, as we do experiments on these new facilities, subscale facilities coming up, where we can do experiments much, much faster, we can match that to machine learning to extract greater insights.
Too many dimensions for the human mind, maybe. Thank you very much, and I will yield back.
Ranking Member Lucas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned in my opening comment, I'm a strong advocate for investing in U.S. contributions to ITER, the world's leading international research collaboration on fusion energy that's received continued bipartisan support from this committee. In your testimony, you note that while the ITER project is physically located in France, and much of our contributions to the project are in fact used to support research, but much of our contributions are used to focus on research here at home. Dr. McCarthy, can you please expand on these comments and explain, providing specific examples if you can, the ways in which U.S. contributions to the ITER program have directly contributed to scientific discoveries and successes in the U.S. fusion community? And along with that, what would it mean to the U.S. research community if we were to fail to meet our commitments to the ITER program?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. So one of the things that the recent National Academies report looked at was specifically how ITER is contributing and will continue to contribute to fusion development broadly. And let's talk, for example, about magnet technologies. We heard about Commonwealth Fusion's recent accomplishment. This is a great step towards being able to have more compact and more cost-effective devices. The research that was done specifically for the superconducting magnets for ITER is directly providing the base for those sorts of accomplishments. And one of the things I think is really important to point out is, as you actually build things, as you scale things up, because ITER was designed based on known technologies, all demonstrated at some scale, sometimes at a much smaller scale. You learn things when you scale up. You learn things that you wouldn't expect. And so there's a lot of engineering challenges, and we tend to, in the fusion program, talk about the plasma, but that is not all there is. You know, we've got to look at the bigger picture, includes things like magnets, but also include things like blanket technologies, materials, and things like that. Other examples. Another one is fuel cycle and continuous fueling, because ITER will run on a deuterium tritium fuel cycle. There's a lot of work that's being done there in terms of the fueling, disruption mitigation. How do you dissipate the heat in an off-normal event? That research is being done for ITER. And there are many other things as well. Plasma heating, that is another area. But it's really important in that practical application, writing specifications that industry then can develop this hardware that meets these very exacting specifications that fit into this machine. That's preparing our US industry for a future fusion industry.
Thank you. And I guess I address my next couple questions to whoever on the panel would like to touch it. Given the panel's various experiences with DOE's Office of Science's Fusion Energy Sciences Advisory Committee, do you have any recommendations on how the Fusion Energy Sciences program could more effectively engage with other relevant programs within the Office of Science, and for that matter, the rest of the department, if necessary? And maybe can I just go to Dr. Ma first? And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, and then turn to Dr. Carter with the same question. And after that, whoever else would like to touch it. Are you muted, Dr. Ma, or am I muted?
Dr. Ma, your audio's out.
Apologies, how's this? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Apologies. I was saying that the recommendation of the report and a feeling amongst the community is there are many great opportunities for our different agencies to work more closely together. There are some great examples now of Fusion Energy Sciences doing joint calls for proposals with NSF or with the NNSA, and those have been hugely valuable and fruitful for the academic community. We can also work more closely with ARPA-E to harness public-private partnerships as well. And so this is something that we have not fully realized within Fusion Energy Sciences, and it's a very economical way as well to grow the overall research portfolio.
If the chairman would humor me, could I ask Dr. Carter that same question?
Yeah, I'll just amplify
Yes,
I'll just amplify what Dr. Ma said. I think we brought up already the need to do better in the sector, interacting with the private sector. ARPA-E does that well, and there's already a collaboration there with FES. I think that needs to be amplified. We also look for help from other agencies that are doing this already. So look at Office of Nuclear Energy within DOE, look at NASA. There are other programs that we can learn from. We'll need unique ideas for fusion energy sciences, but we can learn from those programs and try to implement them within DOE.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Mr. Taston is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks so much to all our witnesses here. Dr. Mumgaard, in your testimony, you mentioned that I guess you expressed a concern that if the U.S. doesn't act now, we run the risk of private companies investing in constructing their fusion power plants elsewhere in the world, and that Congress and DOE should move quickly to fully fund and implement milestone-based cost share development programs to ensure that the first fusion power plant is built in the United States. Based on the recommendations from national academies and FESAC's long-range planning, do you believe that the Department of Energy is at a point to support these commercialization plans?
The legislation lays out a really good pathway, but we've not yet seen the activity from the department itself. So, for instance, there was a request for information about the how to maybe implement a cost share program, what various private entities thought would be helpful. That was submitted almost a year ago, and we've not yet seen any sort of calls or establishment of an office to try to enact those things. Right now it's the signals are not great, and I think that had a strong contributing factor for people looking elsewhere. Is the United States fusion program going to enact these and put in these new programs and these new facilities, or do you go with someone like the UK who's got steel in the ground and programs that are open and taking applications?
And just to be clear, you're talking about, the N=1 commercial plant, right? I mean, in another lifetime, I did a lot of stuff on technology deployment, and the S curve for power generation is always about 20 years from N=1 to 50% penetration. That was true for aeroderivative gas turbines, combined cycles, the wind turbines that my friend Mr. McNerney was involved in. Are we, assuming we got to N=1 first, are we doing enough to actually make sure that we ramp up that curve if we are in fact going to be a meaningful part of decarbonizing by 2050?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're exactly right. N=1, it gets you, only started. You also have to have the policies in place to be able to scale that once you have success. And so in the US, we have a strong history across other energy technologies of things like the Loan Guarantee Office, for instance. How do we get fusion when it's ready for the Loan Guarantee Office? We also need to ensure that we have the right regulatory treatment. The UK has leaned heavily into that and produced a preliminary report on how they intend to do it. And the United States NRC is also taking a look at that in part of a public hearing process. So I'd say that the longer term view is we're well positioned, but this intermediate term view is a bit uncertain.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Carter, I want to get your thoughts on the same topic. You made some similar comments in your testimony that the consensus VSAC planning made recommendations for DOE action to reorient the U.S. fusion program. Do you have any recommendations, Dr. Carter, for ways that the Office of Science can improve its management of fusion energy sciences going forward?
Yeah, well, we now have a vision. It needs to be embraced. We need DOE to implement that plan and work with us in this direction that we know is necessary to realize fusion energy on an aggressive timeline. I think that there's likely a need for change in the structure of the FES program. I already mentioned the need to grow. We have programs like Infuse that are doing good things, but it's a very small program now. We need to look for other mechanisms to do private-public partnership, and that needs to be developed quickly.
Okay, well, thank you both very much. I huge amounts of support for what you do, and I'm a big fan of the Loan Program Office. And if there's anything we can do to help make sure that that's structured to get that ramp up once we get to that first commercialization, please let us know and keep in touch. Thank you both, and I'll yield back.
Mr. Feenstra is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Bowman and Ranking Member Weber. Thank you to each of the witnesses for their testimony and sharing their extensive research and experience with us. The field of fusion energy holds incredible potential for our energy grid, and I'm so excited about it. The breakthroughs made since DOR's Research and Innovation Act in 2018, and especially just this past year, are just incredible and outstanding. The DOE's Ames Laboratory back in my home district is a world leader in materials science innovation. Several of our witnesses today mentioned in their written testimony the importance of developing new materials that can withstand the extreme condition of fusion reactors. So my question is to Dr. Cowley and then also Dr. McCarthy, if you could answer the same thing after Dr. Cowley. Do you have any recommendations on how to improve coordination with materials science experts and accelerate the development of these materials? How could the DOE and its national laboratories be more effectively contribute to this effort?
So, this is a very interesting problem because we've done a bunch of very low-level studies on the materials as they're damaged by the neutrons that come out of fusion. But we've never had a test facility to be able to produce the data in which we can normalize our models onto that. And DOE has started a process to produce what's called a point neutron source to actually test materials. If you want to attract scientists to come into this field and help us solve the problem of getting optimum materials for fusion, some data would be fantastic. So getting that point neutron source going, right, which I believe could be done in a matter of a few years, right, and getting some data from that so that we finally know whether our projections of the lifetime of the wall material in a fusion reactor are good or not. That's an easy no-brainer to speed fusion forward.
Yep, and Dr. McCarthy, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Dr. Cowley. And I want to talk a little bit more about why we need this. So if you look at the fusion reaction, deuterium-tritium reaction, you get neutrons, very energetic, 14 MeV. You can compare that with the energy of a fission neutron when it's born, and that's 2 MeVs. So you can just think about how that 14 MeV neutron is going to do more damage to the material. So we do a lot of testing in fission reactors, but we're limited. We can do testing in spallation sources as well, but we're limited because the energy, the spectrum isn't prototypic. So when you look at actually developing practical, deployable fusion energy, competitive fusion energy, you've got to make sure that you don't have to keep changing out the first wall, for example. You don't have to keep changing out different components. Fission reactors operate on over 90% availability. And that is because they have optimized things. They're down very, very rarely. We have to be the same way. So developing these materials is important. And bringing, for example, at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, we bring in our materials experts who are not necessarily nuclear materials experts because they provide a different sort of perspective. And I go back to these diverse teams. So bring them together, agree with Dr. Cowley on this fusion prototypic neutron source. That is going to be key to taking everything that's being done now and getting to practical competitive fusion energy.
Well, thank you for those comments. So, Dr. McCarthy, one more thing. So you're the director of the U.S. Project Office of ITER, but ITER's central team is made up of 7 core countries, and ITER's staff has scientists, engineers, and staff from all across the globe. I assume each of these countries have different incentives to drive research into fusion energy, as well as barriers to expanding the research. So what do you see? What are some barriers that we have here in Congress that we can look forward to or look at removing, through new policies? Or which new policies would possibly help?
So first of all, what's fascinating is when you work in an international project like this, and I've been involved in fusion for half of my career, starting with graduate school, scientists and engineers want to do the same thing. We're all focused on the same sorts of goals. Now, all of us do have different politics that we have to deal with. They're actually shockingly similar. And I can tell you my 3 years in Canada told me that, their government's a little different, but it's not that different. So one of the challenges that we in the US face is, I think as everybody is aware, appropriations have been lower than what was baseline for the ITER project. And so in some areas, we had to prioritize things that were on critical path and delay some other things. Recent appropriations have allowed us to do some catch up, and that has been very much appreciated, but we're still $97 million behind. So we're looking at how do we ramp up? How do we be a good partner in ITER? And how do we really maximize the benefit from being a partner in ITER? So I would say that certainly is one of the areas. There are also complexities around any sort of international project having people. We want to have people in the US when ITER operates. And there's just practical considerations in how you do that from a tax perspective and things like that. So really a big range of things.
Thank you so much for your comments, and I yield back.
Mr. Lamb is recognized.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us. Dr. Mumgaard, I want to say congratulations, like many others have, I'm sure, about the successful test this summer. And I just wanted to ask about your testimony touched on the importance of the cost share milestone-based approach that was reflected in our Energy Act at the end of last year. And I was wondering if you could just say a few words about why that's important and what is important for us to make sure that DOE does going forward consistent with that approach.
Yeah, so that approach is from the NASA COTS program. It has elements that are come from the Advanced Reactor program. And the key thing here is that you want private industry to do what it does really well, which is to focus on goal-oriented execution. So, put goals down, execute to those goals as fast as possible. And private industry is, willing to do that and take the risks that are part of doing such a milestone-based approach, as long as that when it gets there, it knows that it's part of an ecosystem that's going to help it get to the next step. And so, in that cost share program, the key things are, don't have the public program dictate exactly where to go or exactly how to get there, but do have the public program be alongside so that when you do get there, or if you run into problems along the way in terms of the science and engineering, you get some help. And so it's really not just about money. It's not just about help. It's really about how to tie those together in a way that really frees up the private side to do what it's really good at without duplicating the work the public side is doing, while still bringing the public side along so that the public side can also then reap the rewards of having those new types of facilities. And that worked to very, very good effect in low Earth orbit, which had a higher TRL level than fusion does today, but the principles are still really applicable.
And going forward, what is the sort of important thing to make sure that DOE kind of stays on track or puts the money in the right pots? Or how would you say we should be thinking about this for like the next 5 years?
Yeah, so thinking about it as we want to be sure that we do a portfolio. So this is not just pick one. This is do a portfolio approach and run a process that doesn't just look at, say, only the scientific piece or only the piece that's related to what DOE already does. Instead, run a process that looks holistically of, does this get to a point that has some commercial validation in it? Are the people that are reactor developers, are they interested in this? Are the utilities interested in this? And make sure we have that viewpoint so that it's not just, is the science interesting or is the engineering interesting? We need to be able to balance those views. And the best way to do that, of course, is a portfolio where everyone comes, lays their cards at the table, and we look at the different profiles of economic and technical and scientific risk. And we choose a few that really span that, and that'll give us a good shot at this.
Great, thank you. That kind of leads a little bit into my next question, which is about what the manufacturing needs and the manufacturing footprint could look like later. My state, Pennsylvania, I think is the biggest state for manufacturing in the traditional fission pipeline when it comes to civilian reactors and Navy work. We're certainly up there. And one of the things I want to make sure of is that we're well positioned for both, whatever is coming in the advanced nuclear fission world and in the fusion world. Do you have any thoughts on the way that the current supply chain could prepare itself for, being a fusion supply chain in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that we as industry think a lot about, because for us to be successful, it means we have to build many, many, many power plants. If you want to decarbonize, you're always talking about thousands of power plants independent of what technology you choose. And so you have to be sure that you're able to fulfill that in the long run. So you can't make choices that are unmanufacturable. Fortunately, fusion has a couple things going for it. One, you make a few things, and you make thousands, not billions, and those things are high value and they take skilled labor. It's in many ways similar to like an aerospace endeavor. And in fact, you see a lot of crossover in the private sector between aerospace investors and staff into fusion companies for that exact reason. Which also means that the manufacturing exercises are like things like building turbines or building aircraft components, where they are manufacturing in terms of milling and forging metals, and also an area that you can really take advantage of advanced manufacturing techniques that are up and coming, 3D printing, better heat transfer medias, materials by design. All of that impacts fusion in the same ways it impacts any other sort of mechanical engineering, structural engineering, thermal engineering heavy type of industry. And so we see a lot of crossover there.
Any other witnesses want to address that? I thought Dr. McCarthy kind of touched on the manufacturing piece as well, but I didn't know if you had any specific ideas about, either government programs or things that sort of traditional nuclear companies could do to get ready for this era or to take advantage of it when it's here.
Yep, absolutely. So first of all,
as brief as possible.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
So first of all, there's a lot of similarity in components and the specifications and the need to meet the QA between fission and fusion. And so if you look at ITER, for example, and we do have procurements placed in your state of Pennsylvania, those sorts of activities are getting the industry ready. There's a lot of crossover. It's a small percentage of it that is really specialized that would take additional training.
Glad to hear it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses here for joining and sharing. This has been a really interesting conversation, and I think we're all incredibly excited at the potential here for fusion, we see the news articles from time to time, and having a layman's understanding, it can be hard to get a little bit of that perspective of scale and potential and when that future is realizable. So the possibility that we could have a generation in the 2030s could be, I think is personally incredibly thrilling. But I want to piggyback on what my colleague Mr. Lamb had asked about in terms of staff and talent in order to support this growing field and industry moving forward, so that if we're reaching that point where there is commercially viable on the grid sources of fusion energy, how do we make sure that as we scale that up, that we have the requisite talent in order to do so? So, I'm proud to represent Michigan, specifically West Michigan, but just outside of our district is Michigan State University's FRIB, the Facility for Rare Isotopes, which supports the nuclear physics mission at the Office of Science within the Department of Energy. The facility draws talent from across the country and also across the world in order to advance discoveries of both rare isotopes, nuclear astrophysics, fundamental interactions, and applications for society, whether it's in medicine, homeland security, industry, or in this case, leading towards energy production as well. So how can we expand the existing fusion R&D facilities so we're able to attract talent from across the country and across the world, and also prepare that for the next generation?
One of the, that's a very good question. And I think what we've discovered in the last few years at Princeton, and I know at MIT, they've discovered the same thing, and at UCLA, is that there's a flood of young people coming into the field because they recognize that this is going to be needed to do something absolutely amazing for the planet. And so we have, tripled our applications to our PhD program. The other thing that the National Lab has done, we've done at Princeton, is to initiate an apprenticeship program. Because to make fusion systems work is not just about having, PhD level physicists or whatever, but you've got to have people who think with their hands and are able to construct anything and make anything work, right? And we've been running out of technicians at the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab as they age out. And so we started an apprenticeship program with the state of New Jersey, and started to train, apprentices on the high level engineering skills that are needed to do this. This is the kind of workforce that we will need to make fusion actually happen.
And I want to open that question up to any of the other panelists, but just very quick on that front. I also want to add in, and maybe this is a brief follow-up and can be incorporated with the others, who are we competing with the most? We mentioned the UK earlier as somebody who seems to be taking a slight step ahead. And obviously we have great competition with China on this front and many others. But on the talent front specifically, who are our greatest competitors?
So on the first question around the pipeline, I think it's really important to recognize that as we make investments into these types of facilities that are recommended in the report, the prototypical neutron source and some of the material science elements, those are going to produce fusion generalists that are going to be PhDs and masters that come out of there, and they're going to come out from all over the world, all over the United States in terms of universities that participate in those programs. And that's really the feedstock that someone like I as an industry wants to see happen, because those people then can enter into our growing industry and train other people that we pull from, say, the aerospace industry or from the traditional nuclear sector, train them up on what fusion is like and the different principles. And so it's not just the PhD level scientists, it's the whole spectrum that needs to grow if this is going to take off. In terms of where we're competing, we're obviously competing just across all of STEM with other areas and other fields. And so fusion is very, very attractive, but there's lots of other fields that are very attractive too. So more STEM is better across the board. Internationally, we find the Germans, the Italians, and the UK, those programs are growing new facilities, and those new facilities are very attractive to bright researchers. And so we have to have those competing facilities in the United States if we want to attract them.
There's a very interesting development coming up very, very fast in fusion, and that came out of the German program. For a long time, we've known that three-dimensional devices, which don't have an intrinsic symmetry, might make very good fusion reactors, but they're very complicated. And it wasn't until we got supercomputers to optimize those configurations, and this happened in the German program, and start to use machine learning techniques to optimize the shape of the coils, etc., that we're getting machines that produce fusion level performance. And the Wendelstein machine, which is on the Baltic coast of Germany, has been producing fusion level performance in one of these three-dimensional machines. And now we're starting to have to compete with, the tech companies for their machine learning experts and their computer programming experts and stuff. I'm very excited by this because this is just almost pure thought happening. And we have a collaboration with the Simons Institute and the Simons Fund in New York to develop some of these ideas about optimizing three-dimensional machines that might make the best option for the future in fusion.
Well, thank you. And my time's expired, but I share the excitement over that multidisciplinary possibilities between additive manufacturing, machine learning, fusion technology. The way that all of that's coming together is truly exciting. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Ms. Bonamici is recognized.
Thank you so much to the chair and ranking member and to our impressive panel. I very much appreciate this discussion that we're having about the need for a skilled workforce, both as we rebuild infrastructure, but also as we transition to a clean energy economy. And it's something that I work on frequently as a member of the Committee on Education and the Workforce. And Dr. Cowley, thank you for mentioning apprenticeship. It happens to be National Apprenticeship Week. But it really is a key to, as we're looking at these policies and going forward, we need to have people with the skills to do the work. So Dr. Mumgaard, in your testimony, you referenced the growth of the renewable energy sector over the past decade and how in 2019, renewable energy consumption surpassed coal for the first time in more than 100 years. So how does the development of fusion energy compare to that sort of advent and the proliferation of other zero carbon technologies like solar and wind? And what can we learn from the US government's efforts to support wind and solar? And how can we apply those lessons to fusion?
Yeah, it's been very interesting to watch fusion, at this very early stage, execute what looks like a traditional scale up. The way we saw wind and solar, the way that we've seen nuclear back in the 50s, and the way that we see other technologies outside of energy, where you start with a few people that are pathfinding based on the basic science that then sort of pick up momentum, and then more people join the field. They join at all the different stages of their careers. And hopefully we could get enough foresight to be able to build the programs that are going to train the next generation of people that we're going to need. And if you look at renewables in particular, renewables had to train everyone from the people that maintain wind turbines to the people that manufacture solar panels to the people that figure out where is the best place to build one and how is the best place to hook it up to the grid. And so you have to think holistically about that whole chain of going from the, not just the science, but also the feedstock materials all the way to the point of operating, repairing, and interconnecting those machines. And I think fusion has a big advantage. So one, it looks a lot like the energy sources that have been done before in the terms that it's a power plant that you go out and you build. In fact, you could even think about repowering coal power plants. Right. That would have a lot of the same people involved, a lot of the same skills. And so we can possibly do this quicker than what renewables did because it's a less drastic change and because renewables have paved such a good roadway for us.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. So Dr. Cowley, I know I've overseen fusion efforts in the UK and now in the US. Thank you for your work at the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab. So how do the efforts in the US on fusion energy compare to the UK's efforts? And what should this committee consider when we're crafting policies to help promote US leadership in fusion?
For many, many years, the US has been focused on just the science of fusion. And in that, it's been enormously successful. The ability now to actually calculate what goes on and the science and the understanding, and the DOE's Office of Science has done a wonderful job in doing that. But it has remained divorced from the idea of actually producing an energy source. And that was never true in any of the European programs. And certainly not true in the Chinese program. The Chinese program has got their plan. They're going to deliver on it. It's a very conservative plan, actually, with not much risk in it. But the US program has developed the science for the world. right? And it's been, I came here to graduate school and went back to the UK, and we've all learned from the US program. But it's curious in that the US program has had as its goal fusion science, not fusion energy.
And are you seeing a shift? And if so, is it enough of a shift to have the focus be on fusion energy, not just fusion science?
I think the US is uniquely capable of doing this. I mean, the nuclear energy part of DOE, is a good place to start drawing resources from to be able to design and construct a program that'll go for energy. And I think what you've seen from the FESAC plan is that people want to do that. And we have the industrial base in order to do that. It's not, we're working, for instance, with a wonderful engineering company called Holtec out of Camden, New Jersey, and out of Pittsburgh on constructing pieces for this. This precision engineering the US can really do. I don't see any reason why the US couldn't vault into the lead in a very short amount of time.
That's very encouraging. And of course, PPPL and our national labs, I expect, will be playing a significant role in bringing this transformative technology to market. And it looks like my time has expired. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Jimenez is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And from some of the things I've read about fusion technology, the problem seems to be the containment vessel, itself. And I think we spoke about it a little bit. And Dr. McCarthy, could you talk about that a little bit more, the containment vessel, the destructive aspects of the fusion reaction itself on the vessel that's trying to contain this? And that seems to be the big issue with fusion reactors. And how close are we to finding some kind of solution to that?
So I think that's certainly one of the important issues. I talked about what we call the first wall. That is the wall that faces the plasma. It sees the high heat flux. It sees the neutron flux, and developing materials to withstand that are extremely important. And that's why we need, for example, a prototypic neutron source. But the other piece that we need, and it's tied to that, but it's not, it's tied to it, but a little different, is that whole blanket technology. How do we take the energy that comes out of the plasma, turn it into usable electricity, for example, or process heat, if that's what you want to use it for, in an efficient way? And you also have to produce fuel so that it's self-sustaining in terms of the fuel cycle. So it's a bit bigger than just that first wall. The other thing we have to look at is the neutron flux on magnets, on superconducting magnets. That has an impact on their performance. So there's a large set of things that have to be looked at, but I would say that a lot of them tie to materials. And then that goes back to what Dr. Cowley was talking, and actually several people here on the panel, in terms of the need to invest in materials that will perform over long periods of time.
Well, I mean, if you don't have a containment vessel that actually can contain the reaction, everything else is mute, right?
Yeah, but so within the in a fusion machine, we're actually using the magnetic fields to contain the plasma and keep it away from that first wall. But you still do get particles, you get heat flux that the first wall sees. So it's not exactly the idea of containment like you see in a fission reactor, right?
And you haven't solved that problem yet.
We don't yet have materials that would work in a commercial plant that would be able to sustain that environment, perform in that environment for long enough periods of time. But there's a lot of good work that's going towards that.
I would actually. Are there fuels that are better than others in order to, in other words, that they don't emit the same kind of harmful radiation and destructive radiation that for materials? Is there some kind of fuel that we'd be looking for that could do that? So a combination of fuel and materials?
Yep. So there are other potential fuels. Deuterium tritium is considered the easiest because it requires the lowest temperatures, still temperatures about an order of magnitude hotter than the center of the sun. Other reactions, for example, deuterium produce much fewer neutrons. They require higher temperatures in terms of heating the plasma. So what I would say is that when you look at fusion, the different configuration options, the different fuels, there's None of them is the silver bullet that everything is easier. And what we have to understand is, what are the trade-offs? What are the problems that we can solve? And that takes you down a path of, do you go for something that requires higher temperatures? Do you go for something that requires these materials? And that's where these technology roadmaps that we talked about earlier are important.
Can I just raise something? Because I think there's a slight misconception here. We do have materials that we think will probably work in a fusion reactor. The question is the lifetime of the wall, right? The lifetime will be long enough. We do have materials, but we've never tested them, so we don't know that for sure. And taking the risk of putting them in a future fusion reactor before we've ever tested them doesn't sound like a very pragmatic thing to do. So it's not like we don't have a solution to this problem. We think we do, but we need to test it.
What do you need from us in order to make that happen?
I think the first thing is that what they call a prototypical neutron source, right? Actually make some neutrons that are like the fission neutrons. When that neutron hits a steel, an iron nucleus inside the thing, the iron nucleus recoils and it makes a little melt spot in the steel. And the important thing is you get steels that when they re-solidify after that little melt spot, all the atoms go back into the right place. And we think we have steels that do that, but we have to demonstrate that we do. And
fair enough. My time is up. Thank you so much, and I yield my time back. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Ms. Ross is recognized.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to Chairman Bowman for holding this important meeting. And I want to thank all the panelists for joining us today. As we all know, climate change is an immediate and existential threat, particularly in coastal states like North Carolina, and that's where I represent. That's why I've consistently supported investments in clean energy like wind and solar. But of course, there are amazing potential out there in emerging clean energy technology like fusion, which is not intermittent and can serve as that kind of baseload potential and be good for the environment and for the future of our energy establishment here in the United States. And the development that we've seen and that you've told us about have been remarkable. But the long-term success is going to be dependent on a robust cooperation among government, the private sector, and academia. And I represent NC State University, which is an engineering and STEM university in North Carolina. And so Dr. Carter, NC State's nuclear engineering department is the only nuclear engineering department in North Carolina and a premier department in the country. And the fusion energy industry can only be successful if we maintain a pipeline of graduates equipped to work in this field. And so I have questions about whether or not our US universities are prepared to meet the labor demands in fusion energy, and whether you have any suggestions for what our universities can do to ramp up.
Thanks for that question. First of all, I'm a product of NC State University, so I grew up in North Carolina. I'm very glad to hear you bring that up. Yes, I mean, as we've already brought up, the universities are seeing an influx of students at the undergraduate level, the graduate level, that are really interested in fusion energy, more than we can handle. What we need to do is to strengthen the programs across the board in fusion energy. And this needs action at the university level, it needs action at DOE level to make it happen. We need programs that stimulate this. We need to give leadership opportunities to universities to lead programs. You heard about FRIB earlier. And these kind of programs where the universities really get visibility and leadership draws new faculty and new resources from the university. So finding ways to do that, I think, is very important. We stand ready to do that. The universities that participate in this planning process are ready to roll up our sleeves and get to work. We could use some help, though, from the federal government and from other university systems to push for this change.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything to add before I ask my next question? Okay, so my next question is related to the infrastructure law that we just had the president sign this week. And we are going to be updating our electric grid. And we're doing it because of storm damage. We're doing it because we want to put more renewable energy on the grid. And we've seen difficulties with getting that energy on the grid. Are there changes to our electric grid that we are going to need for fusion energy? And how can we prepare for that now?
Yeah, so we've looked at that pretty extensively, and we have CFS has investors who are in the energy industry. And one of the big advantages is that the fusion product, and independent of how we get there and what the configuration looks like, the fusion product is a very, very flexible energy source. And it comes in a unit size that's about the right unit size for the way that we build grids worldwide. So it's not too big, but it's also not so small. And you can turn it on, you can turn it off. There's the things inside the actual plant don't really care that much about their history. And so that means that, independent of how we do the electrical grid, we're going to have a spot for fusion in it. Whether that is repowering existing sites that have interconnects, or even building out new infrastructure, new grids to support electrification. Fusion is a broad-based support for that.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Mr. Obenoti is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. This has been an incredibly fascinating hearing. My first question is for Dr. Ma. I'd like to continue a line of questioning that Congressman Garcia had started. Congratulations on your achievement in August there at the NIF. That's an amazing breakthrough. You were testifying about the fact that, in response to Congressman Garcia's question, the fact that you'd achieved about 70% of the energy input in terms of output from the fusion reaction. And he was asking about the pathway to get to break even, which, as we all know, is really what's going to be required for power generation. Also, as I understand it, we're not yet at a level where that reaction is self-sustaining. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the pathway from what you achieved in August to getting to something that's both exceeding break even and self-sustaining.
Yes, thank you. And first of all, let me acknowledge the enormous team that made this result happen, and the decades of giants on whose shoulders we stand on, and all of your support over the years. Well, first of all, the NIF is a scientific demonstration facility for high yield, and it was never meant to be energy production. And so even when we achieve gain on the NIF, it does not mean there will be enough energy coming out that you could economically run a power system. What needs to happen is a coordinated inertial fusion energy program in the US, which does not exist right now, a program that could bring together the best minds and develop the technologies that need to occur to make IFE happen. And some of those technologies include drivers, i.e. lasers or pulse power or heavy ions that are economical. We need targets that can be built robustly and cheaply and mass produced. We also need a better understanding of the overall physics. So all of those things need to come together. In terms of what our next steps can be as a country now, we need to develop that framework for an inertial fusion program and figure out how we can also best leverage public-private partnerships. We need to develop a roadmap that is credible and feasible and pulls in our latest understanding with emerging technologies. And then we need to explore alternative schemes as well. There are very innovative ideas out there that could get us to those very high gains that we might need to build a power plant.
Well, great. Thank you very much. It's very helpful. We hope to work with you to achieve those goals. My next question is for Dr. McCarthy. You were talking about the path to commercial fusion-powered energy generation in the United States. And one of the things that you said that I thought was very pertinent was you were talking about the lower failure modes that we have in fusion energy production than we have in fission energy production. And I think that that's going to be critical because we have kind of a political problem with nuclear energy in general, where some of the failures of the past are coloring public perception of fusion energy in the future. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about those failure modes and about how once a reactor is self-sustaining, how a fission reactor has lower failure modes than a fusion reactor has lower failure modes than a fission reactor, because I think that articulation is going to be very critical to gaining the widespread public acceptance that we're going to need to make this technology feasible.
So first of all, I'll start out by saying that fission reactors are safe. They are highly regulated. They have all the systems in place so that to mitigate any abnormal events. Now, if we look at a fusion reactor, there are some inherent differences. And one of them that I talked about has to do with the radioactive waste that's produced. So there are technical solutions to isolation of radioactive waste. They've not been successful. So we haven't moved forward really with long-term disposal for fission waste. We don't have the same issues with fusion because we don't have that waste that requires long-term geologic isolation. That's a big one from the perspective of public perception. And then with respect to safety, what we in the industry call the source term, that's the stuff that could potentially be mobilized and scattered. The source term in a fusion reactor is much, much, much smaller than what's in a fission reactor. And what you have to look at is the combination of source term plus energy to disperse it. That's kind of how you look at safety from the big picture. So fusion has some advantages from that perspective. But there's a lot that we can learn from fission and a lot that is applicable from fission to fusion when it comes to how we do things. Keeping things simple is very important. Fission is a relatively simple technology. This is one of the fusion challenges. So where we can simplify things and where we can, and I think it was Dr. Mumgaard who talked about how important it is to have the industry connection as we're doing this to understand what they want. That's one of the things we did in the National Academy's report. The scientists' a dream is not necessarily the utilities dream. And so that connection is important. And I apologize, I think I've gone over.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We look forward to working with you to further the public perception there. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Lofgren is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank you and Chairwoman Johnson, the ranking members for this important hearing today. And I wanted to extend a special welcome and thanks to Dr. Ma for being with us and for the work that she has done in representing the other scientists who've worked over these many years at the National Ignition Facility. You know, I was there. This has been a bipartisan effort. I remember former Congressman Bill Baker leading the charge. I didn't agree with Bill on a lot of things, but we agreed on this. And then Ellen Tauscher, who took up the cudgel and generations of fighting for this. I remember when Ed Moses was the director of the lab, and I asked him, how will we know when we get burning plaza? And he said, well, you'll see the scientists doing handstands. So I was really pleased to be advised of the handstands right after August 8th by the director of the lab. And it's a marvelous achievement, and I appreciate it greatly. You know, the NIF has played an important role, but as you've mentioned, you're the science piece. You're not going to be the energy production piece, but you've got some more things to do. And so here's a question, a direct question. You don't need to agree with me because, I know it's true. There have been fights with NNSA over the years about the NIF's science experiments versus the nuclear stockpile mission, which is a primary mission. I mean, there were those over the years who thought that you could do science on a schedule, you know, and you can't, but you have achieved what I thought would be happening in a few years when I was at the groundbreaking and then the opening of the facility. You've achieved the burning plasma now. I want to make sure that you are getting what you need from NNSA in terms of the capacity to proceed on the further experiments because obviously we need the stockpile maintenance, is a very important element of our security posture. But our security posture is also dependent on limitless clean energy. We need to be able to remove carbon from the atmosphere because of climate change. We're going to need to do desalination, which is going to require a limitless pollution-free energy source because of the droughts that we are having in the West. So fusion is an essential element of our national security. So are you able to say what you would need by way of support from your governing agency, NNSA, in order to optimize the science that still needs to go on at the NIF?
So thank you for your comments and your continued support over the years. The NNSA has been a very good sponsor for us. And I think on the NIF, we have demonstrated the success of the science-based stockpile stewardship program. Very recently, we've done experiments on plutonium aging that have been very important for the NNSA mission, equation of state experiments, et cetera. You are completely hitting the nail on the head to say that energy security and energy sovereignty are an important part of national security. And as such, NNSA would, and they recognize that energy security is an important part of that. We are very focused right now, of course, on meeting certain milestones, and we're under pressure, so that is understandable. What would be very important for us is sustained and robust funding to ensure that we can continue to have strong scientific experiments on the NIF, to have a robust, what we call discovery science program, where we open up the facility to academics worldwide. And a little bit of flexibility to see the dual use purposes of the inertial confinement fusion research that we do on the NIF.
Well, I thank you very much for that very skillful diplomatic answer. And I look forward, there was a time when NNSA wanted to shut down all of the science projects a few decades ago, and the Congress rallied around in a day to put a stop to that. So I'm sure that we will have a bipartisan effort to make sure that the science gets done. Let me yield back with thanks to Dr. Foster for letting me jump ahead of him.
Dr. Foster is recognized.
Hello, am I audible and visible here?
Yes.
Great. Well, first, I'd like to echo my appreciation to the chairwoman and ranking member for their work on the DOE Science for the Future Act, and specifically to the ranking member for his polite restraint in his description of the Senate counterproposal, and to the scientific community for their enthusiastic embrace of the House proposal. Now, Dr. Ma, first off, congratulations to you and the whole NIF team. I understand there was a fairly celebratory mood at the DPP plasma physics meeting in Pittsburgh earlier this month. And so say hi to everyone that I know there, some mutual friends. One of my pet peeves when I was a practicing scientist was congressional micromanaging of science. And so now hereby I get my revenge. Now, I understand that following your record-breaking 1.3 megajoule shot, there have been a couple of subsequent shots with lower yields in the range of 0.5 megajoule. So what is the current best understanding of what's going to be required, first for reproducible yields and eventually further yield improvements? Is there a sort of a detailed roadmap or a flow chart of future shots that might be provided to us to track progress against?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we, like you said, we have recently done a few repeat shots, and we did our best to try to replicate the target, the laser performance, et cetera. However, we know that when we built the NIF with the 1.92 megajoules of laser energy that the laser has, we were just right at the hairy edge of what we would need for ignition. So every little detail counts here, every bump, every divot, every speck of dust. Oh, I take that back. We don't even have specks of dust on our targets, but they all play a role in the physics performance that we see. So with those repeat shots, the yields were a little bit lower, and that is because there were some more imperfections in the target. The laser delivery was not quite as good, and we're now doing the analyses, and we will go through the scientific peer review process to ensure the community agrees with us. But we are trying to understand those sensitivities of those different parameters. Now, going forward, we will continue to test by pushing to slightly higher velocities, which for us equates to kinetic energy into the system. And we are testing slightly different target designs that should give us a little bit higher coupling. And those experiments will take several years to do because our experiments are so complex. Each one takes several months to actually set up. So stay tuned. That's what the roadmap looks like going forward.
Okay, you also mentioned that heavy ion accelerators as a potential energy efficient fusion driver, at least for the compression, maybe to follow with fast ignition or something like that. You know, as you may know, I served on the DOE Heavy Ion Fusion Advisory Board back in the day. And so is this an effort that's likely to be re-energized following the NIF yields?
We will certainly be looking into heavy ion fusion. The advantage of heavy ion fusion is you can get much higher coupling efficiencies of driver energies into the targets. The heavy ion fusion program was shut down in the mid-2010s because it was recognized that to do those experiments, you really have to do them at scale. And you need very big.
No, I'm aware of the challenges. I was just wondering if that's something that people are going to, you know, and it was a rather demoralizing decade for inertial component fusion generally, because of the frustration over NIF that is now evaporated. Also, about a decade ago, Livermore and the ICF community put a lot of effort into what was called the LIFE project. And this is a fusion fission hybrid, which uses the fusion basically as a source of neutrons and the energy produced mainly in the fissile blanket around it. And potentially that can be used to burn spent nuclear fuel, burn excess weapons grade plutonium, all sorts of other side benefits. Is this an effort that's also maybe worth reviving now that that you're getting the yields that you planned to a decade ago?
So as a community, we absolutely hope to build off the good technical work that was done on LIFE, which was a full systems engineering and looking at all the different components. However, that is a decision that will need to be made by DOE. And we will also be holding a basic research needs for IFE in the next year, where we will lay out what the priority research directions are. And I expect that continuation of the LIFE work will be a component of that.
Okay, and now I have used up all my time and maybe 1% of the questions I have. Congratulations to everyone.
Mr. Byers recognized.
Thank you very much. And Chairman Bowman, thanks very much for holding this hearing. This is the most exciting hearing I've seen in 2021 in terms of the potential. I keep talking about, we have a little more than $1 billion for fusion energy coming out of blessed by the Science Committee and included in Build Back Better. And in a bill that could be approaching $2 trillion, this is the stuff that's most transformational. So I'm really excited that you guys are leading on this. Dr. Ma, you talked again and again about inertial fusion energy. Is that a different idea than what Dr. Mumgaard is doing at Commonwealth Fusion? Is this a different approach to fusion energy?
Yes, it is. The idea behind inertial fusion is you use the inertia of the target itself to do the compression and holding together the plasma long enough for fusion reactions to occur. With magnetic fusion, you use magnetic fields on a much lower density plasma to hold that together for actually longer amounts of time to get that to fuse. There are pros and cons and advantages to both schemes. With inertial confinement, one of the major advantages is that you get to actually separate the target from the driver itself. So whether it's lasers, pulse power, heavy ions, you can deliver that laser energy separately from the target design. And so it allows for flexibility in how you test out those two schemes. There are a lot of overlaps in terms of reactor building, the materials challenges that we would have. So we do hope to work together and learn from each other.
Thank you. Sir Dr. Cowley, you talked a little bit about the National Academy survey, and which was pretty optimistic, not as optimistic as the private sector, as Commonwealth Fusion and Helion and others. Are there specific, is it possible to lay out the series of specific benchmarks in technology and science that have to be met in order to get to commercially available fusion? Well, first you fought a war so that you didn't have to call me sir. Oh. Well, it's still pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah, that's actually one of the things that I think we need to really settle in and do after the FESAC plan, which is a technology roadmap. The kind of technology roadmap that the tech companies put forward when they want a new product, or a chip company puts forward when it wants a new product, because there are lots of little details that could fall through the cracks and then delay, the delivery process. So the idea of having fusion pilot plant designs done in this next, really we should get started today, is that as we get those designs, we can work back from them and say, we need to solve this problem by 2022, this problem by 2024, and that kind of technology roadmap. So it's critical at the moment. Yeah. Thank you very much. Dr. Mumgaard, I've been telling everybody that, the old DOE was 2060, and then the Academy's moving up to 2040, and you guys are saying maybe 2030. Can I say that with credibility?
So, the survey of all the fusion companies says the majority say 2030s. And why do we think that's possible? We think that's possible because it's a confluence of various technologies that are all happening at once, plus the capital and sort of human infrastructure, both on the stakeholder side and simply on the employees and engineer side, that allows us to try things. So, for instance, when we went to the National Academies in 2018 and said we want to develop a high temperature superconducting magnet, the view was maybe that would take 10, 20 years. We did it in 3, and we were able to do that, not because we're smarter than everybody or anything like that, but we're able to do that because we can apply lessons learned in how you do really fast innovation of build, try, break, try, break very, very quickly. And some parts of fusion are conducive to that, where you don't necessarily need a centralized plan that's very, very serial. You can break it into modular pieces that you can try out, break, and integrate only when you absolutely need to do that. And so if you look across the companies, that's a defining factor of many of them, is how do you make problems into things that you can separate? How do you make problems into things you can try? How do you get iteration into the loop? And then how do you couple that with people that are very, very good at building things very, very quickly? And so, we think that it is feasible to get these types of systems online in the 30s. And perhaps more importantly, the timeline is, a set by the climate and by the energy transition. So there is a huge amount of pull to go faster. If we all got to choose what is the path to get there and what is the right time to get there, we make different choices than what carbon is choosing to force us to do. And so that impacts, our planet at CFS every single day, that timeline. How do we make technical decisions that could enable that timeline? And it's really a good thing for this committee today because, we're talking about what are the investments we need to make now that would give us a better shot at that, not just CFS, but also the public program and also the other companies.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I get discouraged about how slowly we move here. So my new legislative strategy is build, try, break.
Well, once again, thank you to all of our witnesses for being here. This was an amazing hearing about a topic that, I think will take our economy and humanity into the future. So this is really exciting. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members and for any additional questions the committee may ask of the witnesses. The witnesses are now excused. The hearing is now adjourned. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.